Bullies try to pour soda on the new girl's head. Big mistake. She was a combat sports champion. Sienna Reeves stood at the entrance of Westfield High School, her olive green backpack slung over one shoulder, watching streams of students flood through the double doors. At 17, she was petite, barely 5'3", with shoulder-length auburn hair that she kept tucked behind her ears and freckles scattered across her pale cheeks. Her oversized hoodie and worn jeans made her blend into the background, exactly how she preferred it. This was her third school in 2 years, and she'd learned that staying invisible was the safest strategy. The sprawling brick building loomed before her, complete with the typical high school architecture of long corridors, fluorescent lighting, and that distinct smell of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with teenage anxiety. Westfield High housed nearly 2,000 students, making it easy for someone like Sienna to disappear into the crowd. She pulled her class schedule from her pocket, scanning the room numbers while navigating through clusters of laughing teenagers who'd known each other since kindergarten. Just keep your head down, she reminded herself, the familiar mantra that had gotten her through countless first days. Don't make waves, don't draw attention, graduate, and get out. What none of these students could possibly know was that Sienna Reeves had been training in mixed martial arts since she was 8 years old. Her father, a former Navy SEAL turned MMA instructor, had moved the family constantly due to his work consulting for various gyms and training facilities across the country. In their tiny apartment, Sienna's bedroom walls were covered with medals, trophies, and certificates from Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournaments, kickboxing competitions, and amateur MMA fights. She held a black belt in Taekwondo, was ranked nationally in her weight class for amateur MMA, and could submit opponents twice her size on the mat. But here at Westfield High, she was just another new girl trying to find her locker. The first period bell rang, and Sienna hurried toward her chemistry class, weaving through the crowded hallway. That's when she first encountered them. "Watch it, freak!" sneered a voice behind her as someone deliberately bumped into her shoulder, sending her stumbling forward. Sienna caught herself against a locker and turned to see 3 girls standing behind her, each wearing the kind of expensive clothes and perfect makeup that screamed "popular crowd." The leader was a tall blonde named Madison Crawford, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in town. Her ice blue eyes held a coldness that seemed to evaluate everyone around her for potential entertainment value. Flanking her were Jessica Torres, a brunette with a permanent sneer who served as Madison's enforcer, and Chloe Park, whose nervous energy suggested she followed the group more out of fear than genuine friendship. "I said watch it," Madison repeated, stepping closer. Her voice carried that particular tone of entitled authority that came from years of getting whatever she wanted. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" Sienna felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every fight, the heightened awareness, the automatic assessment of distance and angles, the muscle memory of countless hours of training. Her hands wanted to form fists. Her stance wanted to shift into a fighting position. Every instinct screamed at her to show these girls exactly what happened when someone disrespected her. Instead, she looked down at the scuffed linoleum floor. "Sorry," she mumbled, adjusting her backpack strap. "I didn't see you there." Madison's laugh was sharp and theatrical. "Oh, this is going to be fun. What's your name, Mouse?" "Sienna." "Well, Sienna," Madison drew out her name like it tasted unpleasant. "Let me explain how things work around here. There's a food chain, and you're definitely at the bottom. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." "I could put all 3 of them on the ground before they knew what hit them," Sienna thought, watching Madison's exposed stance and complete lack of awareness about personal space and defensive positioning. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But starting fights on her first day wasn't part of the plan. Her father had drilled into her that martial arts were for self-defense and competition, not for dealing with petty high school drama. More importantly, her family needed stability. Her mother had finally found steady work as a nurse at the local hospital, and they couldn't afford another move because Sienna had gotten into trouble. So she nodded, mumbled another apology, and hurried to chemistry class while Madison's laughter echoed behind her. The pattern established itself quickly over the following weeks. Madison and her crew, who had apparently appointed themselves the unofficial welcoming committee for new students they deemed unworthy, made Sienna's life a daily exercise in humiliation. They'd knock books from her hands in the hallway, making her scramble to collect scattered papers while other students stepped around her. They'd accidentally bump into her lunch tray in the cafeteria, sending food splattering across her clothes. They'd whisper just loud enough for her to hear comments about her thrift store wardrobe, her lack of friends, her general existence. Each incident was carefully calculated to stay just below the threshold that would attract teacher intervention. Madison was too smart to do anything that would get her in serious trouble, but she was creative in her cruelty. In the gymnasium during mandatory PE class, they'd make sure Sienna was always chosen last for teams. In the hallways between periods, they'd form human barriers that forced her to take longer routes to class. In the cafeteria, they'd claim tables near wherever she sat and make loud comments about the weird new girl who probably has lice. The worst part wasn't the harassment itself. Sienna had dealt with far worse opponents in the cage who were actually trying to hurt her. The worst part was the complete indifference of everyone around them. Teachers who witnessed the subtle bullying would look away rather than deal with the social politics of teenage hierarchies. Other students, grateful not to be targets themselves, pretended not to notice when Madison's crew cornered Sienna after school or made her life miserable during lunch. "They're all cowards," Sienna thought during one particularly brutal session where Jessica had accidentally spilled chocolate milk on Sienna's only decent pair of jeans. She sat in the bathroom during lunch, using paper towels to clean the stain and fighting back tears of frustration. Every single one of them. At home, she said nothing to her parents about the bullying. Her father was working long hours at a new gym across town, trying to build up his client base. Her mother was pulling double shifts at the hospital, grateful for the steady income and health insurance. They were both so relieved to finally have some stability that Sienna couldn't bring herself to complain about something as mundane as high school bullies. Instead, she channeled her frustration into her training. Their apartment complex had a small fitness center that stayed open 24 hours, and Sienna spent her evenings working the heavy bag, practicing her combinations, drilling the grappling techniques that had won her championships in 3 different states. She'd shadowbox in front of the mirror, imagining Madison's face as her target, then feel guilty for thinking such thoughts. Violence isn't the answer, she'd remind herself, echoing her father's teachings. You're better than that. But as the weeks passed and the harassment intensified, that conviction became harder to maintain. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late October. The cafeteria was packed with the usual lunch crowd, athletes holding court at their tables, drama kids rehearsing lines while they ate, academic overachievers hunched over homework they should have finished the night before. Sienna had found a small table in the corner where she could eat her bag lunch in relative peace while reading a paperback novel she'd borrowed from the library. She was halfway through a sandwich when Madison's voice cut through the general cafeteria noise. "Oh, look, girls, the loser is eating her poverty lunch again." Sienna looked up to see Madison approaching with Jessica and Chloe flanking her, along with 2 boys she recognized as members of the basketball team. Tyler Brennan and Marcus Rodriguez were the kind of guys who'd never noticed Sienna before, but were always eager to impress the popular girls by participating in whatever cruelty they had planned. "I heard her family shops at Goodwill for groceries," Jessica added loudly, ensuring that nearby tables could hear every word. "Explains why she always looks like she hasn't showered." Sienna felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to keep reading, hoping they'd get bored and move on to easier targets. The words on the page blurred as her heart rate increased and her breathing became shallow, not from fear, but from the effort required to keep her training instincts suppressed. "I'm talking to you, freak," Madison said, now standing directly beside Sienna's table. "It's rude to ignore people when they're speaking to you." "Walk away," Sienna told herself. "Just pack up and leave. Don't engage." She started to close her book and gather her things, but Tyler was faster. He reached across the table and snatched the paperback from her hands, holding it up like a trophy. "What's this garbage? Pride and Prejudice." He laughed, showing the cover to his friends. "Who reads this boring crap?" "Give it back," Sienna said quietly, finally looking up at him. "It's not mine. I borrowed it from the library." "Oh no," Madison said in mock concern. "Did we interrupt your very important reading time? I'm so sorry." She gestured to Marcus, who was holding a large cup of Coca-Cola from the vending machines. "Maybe we should help you cool off. You look a little overheated." The cafeteria had grown quieter as nearby students sensed drama brewing. Some kids were pretending not to watch, while others had turned to stare openly, their phones already out to record whatever was about to happen. Even the lunch staff had paused their cleanup duties to observe from behind the serving counter. "Please," Sienna said, standing up slowly, "just give me my book back and leave me alone." Madison stepped closer, invading Sienna's personal space in a way that would have been considered aggressive behavior in any other context. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, Mouse?" The question hung in the air between them. Sienna could feel the attention of dozens of students focused on this moment, waiting to see if she would finally fight back or continue to accept their abuse. She could see the smug confidence in Madison's expression, the absolute certainty that this awkward new girl would do nothing but take whatever punishment they decided to dish out. "I could end this right now," Sienna thought, automatically cataloging Madison's weaknesses. The way she stood with her weight unevenly distributed, the complete lack of hand position or defensive awareness, the exposed targets from her throat to her solar plexus. One uppercut to the stomach would double her over, a leg sweep would put her on the ground. A simple arm drag would have her face first against the floor before she even knew what happened. Instead, Sienna took a step backward. "Nothing. I just want my book back." Madison's smile widened. "I don't think so. I think what you want is a lesson in respect." She nodded to Marcus, who raised his cup of soda high above Sienna's head. "Maybe a nice cold shower will help you understand your place in the social order." Time seemed to slow as Marcus tilted the cup and brown liquid began to pour towards Sienna's face. She could see every droplet, could calculate the trajectory and timing with the precision that came from years of avoiding punches and kicks in the ring. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to block, to retaliate. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the cold soda splash across her head and shoulders, soaking her hair and running down inside her hoodie. The liquid was sticky and sweet, and she could feel it dripping onto the floor around her feet. The cafeteria erupted in a mixture of gasps, laughter, and the distinctive sound of dozens of phones recording the moment for social media posterity. When she opened her eyes, Madison was practically glowing with satisfaction. "There, much better. Maybe next time you'll remember to show proper respect to your betters." Sienna stood there dripping, feeling the weight of every stare in the cafeteria. She could hear whispered comments and muffled laughter, could see the satisfaction on the faces of her tormentors, could feel the complete indifference of the adults who were supposed to protect students, but had somehow missed this entire incident. Something fundamental shifted inside her in that moment. Not anger, she'd been angry for weeks. Not embarrassment, she was long past caring about her social reputation. What changed was her acceptance of the situation. "I'm done," she realized, wiping soda from her eyes. "I'm done being their victim." You missed a spot, she said quietly, looking directly at Madison for the first time since the confrontation had begun. Madison blinked, clearly not expecting any response other than tears or further submission. What did you say? Sienna smiled. Not the nervous, apologetic expression she'd worn for weeks, but something colder and far more confident. I said you missed a spot. If you're going to humiliate someone, you should probably do it right the first time. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the lunch staff had stopped pretending to work and were staring openly at the confrontation unfolding before them. Madison's face flushed red with anger and confusion. What the hell is wrong with you? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Madison Crawford, Sienna replied calmly, using her sleeve to wipe more soda from her face. Daughter of Robert Crawford, who owns Crawford Properties. Captain of the cheerleading squad, straight-A student who's never faced a real challenge in her privileged life. The accuracy of this assessment seemed to surprise Madison even more than Sienna's sudden confidence. How do you... I do my research, Sienna interrupted. Just like I researched Tyler Brennan, starting point guard who's banking on a basketball scholarship because his family can't afford college tuition, and Marcus Rodriguez, whose father works 2 jobs to keep their family afloat while Marcus pretends to be part of the popular crowd. Both boys shifted uncomfortably at having their backgrounds exposed so casually. Tyler's jaw tightened while Marcus took an unconscious step backward. The point is, Sienna continued, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with? Madison laughed, but it sounded forced and uncertain. Some pathetic loser who lets people pour soda on her head. Yeah, I think I've got you figured out. Sienna nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're absolutely right. I did let you pour soda on my head. I let you humiliate me in front of everyone. I let you treat me like garbage for weeks. She paused, letting that admission sink in before continuing. But here's what you don't understand, Madison. I didn't let you do those things because I couldn't stop you. I let you do them because I was trying to be better than you. I was trying to prove that I could handle my problems without resorting to violence. Something in her tone must have registered as dangerous because Madison took an almost imperceptible step backward. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you just crossed a line, Sienna said, her voice remaining perfectly calm even as her posture began to subtly shift. Her feet moved to shoulder-width apart. Her hands, which had been hanging loosely at her sides, came up slightly. I'm talking about the fact that you've been pushing and pushing, assuming I'd never push back. You're insane, Jessica interjected, trying to support her leader. It's just a stupid drink. Don't be such a drama queen. Sienna turned her attention to Jessica, and the brunette actually flinched at the intensity of her gaze. You're right, it is just a stupid drink. But it's not about the drink, is it? It's about respect. It's about thinking you can treat people however you want because you've never faced any consequences. She looked around the cafeteria, taking in the sea of faces watching this confrontation unfold. How many of you have wanted to stand up to them? How many of you have let them make your lives miserable because you were afraid of becoming their next target? Several students shifted uncomfortably, but no one answered. The silence stretched until Madison broke it with a nervous laugh. Okay, you've had your little speech. Very inspiring. Now why don't you go clean yourself up before you drip all over the floor? No, Sienna said simply. The single word seemed to echo in the quiet cafeteria. Madison's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't quite process what she'd heard. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not cleaning myself up. I'm not walking away. Sienna's stance shifted again, becoming more balanced, more grounded. I'm done running from you. Tyler, apparently deciding that the situation needed to be resolved before it got out of hand, stepped forward with what he probably thought was an intimidating expression. "Look, freak, you need to calm down before you do something really stupid." "Tyler," Sienna said without taking her eyes off Madison, "I'd strongly recommend that you step back and stay out of this." Something in her voice, a quiet confidence that suggested she knew exactly what she was talking about, made Tyler hesitate. But peer pressure and masculine pride won out over common sense. "Or what?" he demanded, moving closer to Sienna. "What are you going to do about it?" That's when Sienna finally allowed her training to surface. The movement was so fast that most of the watching students didn't even see it happen. One moment, Tyler was standing there trying to look threatening, and the next, he was on his knees on the cafeteria floor, his right arm twisted behind his back in a textbook arm bar that had him completely immobilized. "What I'm going to do," Sienna said conversationally, applying just enough pressure to make Tyler gasp in pain, "is show you what happens when you pick on someone who actually knows how to fight back." The cafeteria erupted in shocked murmurs and excited whispers. Students were climbing on chairs to get better views, phones were recording from every angle, and even the lunch staff had abandoned any pretense of not watching the drama unfold. "Let him go," Madison shrieked, her careful composure finally cracking. "You're insane! I'm calling security." "Go ahead," Sienna replied calmly, maintaining the armbar with effortless control. "I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about how you and your friends have been systematically harassing a new student for weeks. I'm sure the administration would love to see all the videos your classmates have been taking of your bullying sessions." She could see the realization dawning on Madison's face, the understanding that there were witnesses, evidence, and consequences that she'd never considered before. "Besides," Sienna continued, "I'm not hurting Tyler. I'm just demonstrating a simple restraint technique, aren't I, Tyler?" Tyler, whose face was red from embarrassment and the awkward angle of his arm, managed to nod. Yeah, she's not really hurting me." "Good, because hurting people is wrong." Sienna applied just a tiny bit more pressure, making Tyler wince. "Bullying people is wrong. Humiliating people for your own entertainment is wrong." She released Tyler's arm and stepped back, allowing him to scramble to his feet while rubbing his shoulder. The basketball player looked around the cafeteria at all the watching faces, clearly mortified at being subdued so easily by someone half his size. "Now," Sienna said, turning her attention back to Madison, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Madison was staring at her with a mixture of shock and calculation, clearly trying to process this dramatic shift in power dynamics. "What are you talking about?" "My book. Tyler took it from me." Tyler, eager to distance himself from this situation, quickly picked up the paperback from where he'd dropped it and held it out to Sienna. "Here, take it. I don't want any more trouble." Sienna accepted the book calmly, checking to make sure it hadn't been damaged. "Thank you. See how easy that was? You asked nicely, I gave you what you wanted. It's called basic human decency." Marcus, who had been watching this entire exchange with growing nervousness, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all just calm down and—" "Marcus," Sienna interrupted, "I'm going to give you some free advice. Walk away, right now. Take Tyler and go sit at your table and finish your lunch like none of this happened." The two boys looked at Madison, clearly hoping for guidance, but she seemed frozen in indecision. After a moment of awkward silence, they began backing away from the confrontation. "Don't you dare leave me here," Madison hissed at them. But they were already retreating to their usual table on the other side of the cafeteria. That left Madison, Jessica, and Chloe facing Sienna alone. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and everyone in the cafeteria could feel it. "So," Sienna said, her voice still perfectly calm. What happens next is entirely up to you, Madison. You can apologize for weeks of harassment, clean up the mess you made, and treat me with basic human respect going forward. Or what? Madison demanded, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Sienna smiled that same cold smile she'd displayed earlier. Or we can settle this right here, right now, in front of everyone. Your choice. The challenge hung in the air between them. Madison looked around the cafeteria, taking in the sea of watching faces, the recording phones, the complete attention focused on this moment. She was clearly calculating the social cost of backing down versus the potential consequences of escalating further. You're bluffing, she said finally. You wouldn't dare actually fight me. You'd get expelled. Would I? Sienna asked. Let's see. You've been systematically harassing me for weeks. You just poured soda on my head in front of dozens of witnesses. You've created a hostile educational environment and prevented me from enjoying my right to learn in peace. She gestured around the cafeteria. I think any reasonable person would conclude that I'm defending myself against a bully who has escalated to physical assault. Madison's face went pale as she realized the legal and academic implications of what Sienna was suggesting. It was just a prank. It was just soda. Assault doesn't require serious injury, Sienna replied. Just unwanted physical contact, or the reasonable fear of such contact. Throwing liquid on someone definitely qualifies. Jessica, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Madison, maybe we should just apologize and— Shut up! Madison snapped, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. I'm not apologizing to this freak. Who does she think she is? The outburst seemed to surprise even her own friends. Chloe took a step backward, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this confrontation was heading. Jessica looked torn between loyalty to Madison and self-preservation. I'll tell you exactly who I think I am, Sienna said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried clearly across the silent cafeteria. I'm someone who spent years learning how to defend myself. I'm someone who has faced opponents who were actually trying to hurt me, not just humiliate me. I'm someone who has won championships in 3 different combat sports. She took a step closer to Madison, who instinctively backed away. But most importantly, I'm someone who is completely done being your victim. The statement seemed to reverberate through the cafeteria. Students who had been whispering fell completely silent. Even the lunch staff had stopped any pretense of working and were watching the confrontation with rapt attention. Madison looked around desperately, clearly hoping someone would intervene or provide her with an escape route. But her usual supporters had abandoned her, the teachers were conveniently absent, and the watching students seemed more interested in seeing justice served than in protecting the school's social hierarchy. Fine, she said finally, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. You want to act tough? Let's see how tough you really are. She swung at Sienna, a wild, uncoordinated slap that telegraphed its intention from a mile away. In the cage, Sienna had dealt with fighters who threw punches at speeds that would make Madison's attack look like slow motion. This was almost insultingly easy to handle. Sienna caught Madison's wrist effortlessly, redirected the momentum, and used a simple hip toss to send the blonde girl tumbling to the cafeteria floor. The throw was controlled and precise, designed to be impressive rather than injurious, but it put Madison flat on her back in front of the entire student body. The cafeteria exploded in cheers, gasps, and excited chatter. Students were climbing on tables to get better views, phones were recording from every angle, and the energy in the room was electric. Madison scrambled to her feet, her face red with humiliation and rage. "You bitch! She charged at Sienna again, this time attempting some kind of tackle. It was even less effective than her first attack. Sienna simply stepped aside, grabbed Madison's outstretched arm, and used the girl's own momentum to send her sliding across the linoleum floor on her stomach. When Madison tried to get up a second time, Sienna was there waiting. A simple leg sweep put the blonde back on the ground, and this time Sienna followed up by placing one foot gently but firmly on Madison's chest, pinning her in place. "Stay down," Sienna said calmly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Madison was breathing hard, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled and dirty from contact with the cafeteria floor. She looked up at Sienna with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and dawning fear. "Get off me," she gasped. "Are you going to stop attacking me?" Sienna asked. Madison glared at her but didn't answer. Sienna applied just a tiny bit more pressure with her foot. Not enough to hurt, but enough to make her point clear. "I asked you a question, Madison. Are you going to stop attacking me?" "Yes," Madison said through gritted teeth. "Yes, I'll stop." "Good." Sienna stepped back, allowing Madison to sit up. "Now, I believe you owe me an apology." Madison looked around the cafeteria at all the watching faces, clearly calculating whether her social standing could survive public submission to someone she'd been bullying for weeks. "I'm not apologizing to you," she said finally. Sienna nodded, as if she'd expected this response. "That's your choice, but let me make something very clear to everyone watching this." She raised her voice so it would carry to every corner of the cafeteria. "Madison Crawford and her friends have been systematically harassing me since my first day at this school. They've humiliated me, destroyed my property, and made my life miserable for their own entertainment. Today, they escalated to physical assault by pouring soda on my head." She gestured to her still sticky hair and clothes as evidence. "I tried to handle this peacefully. I tried to ignore them, tried to avoid confrontation, tried to be the bigger person. But there comes a point where peaceful solutions aren't enough. There comes a point where you have to stand up for yourself, even if it means fighting back." The cafeteria was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "So let me be very clear about the new rules," Sienna continued. "I will not be anyone's victim. I will not tolerate harassment, bullying, or any other form of abuse. And if anyone decides to test those boundaries, they'll discover exactly what I'm capable of." She looked directly at Madison, who was still sitting on the floor looking disheveled and defeated. "As for you, Madison, consider this your one and only warning. Stay away from me. Don't speak to me, don't look at me, don't even acknowledge my existence. Because if you ever try to humiliate me again, what happened here today will seem like a gentle suggestion compared to what I'll do next time." Madison scrambled to her feet, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "This isn't over," she said, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "Yes, it is," Sienna replied calmly. "It's completely over. You're done being a bully, at least where I'm concerned. And if you're smart, you'll extend that courtesy to everyone else in this school." Madison looked around the cafeteria one more time, taking in the stares, the phones, the complete destruction of her carefully maintained social image. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit, Jessica and Chloe trailing behind her. As soon as they were gone, the cafeteria erupted in conversation. Students were crowding around Sienna, asking questions, offering congratulations, and recounting what they'd just witnessed. Several kids who had been previous targets of Madison's bullying approached to thank her for finally standing up to their tormentor. "That was amazing," gushed a sophomore girl whose lunch money Madison had been borrowing for weeks. "I can't believe you actually took her down." "Where did you learn to fight like that?" asked a junior boy who'd been on the receiving end of Tyler's harassment. Sienna found herself surrounded by admirers and curiosity seekers, all eager to bask in the reflected glory of someone who had finally stood up to the school's most notorious bullies. The attention was overwhelming and unfamiliar. For weeks, she'd been invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to be her friend. "I've been training in martial arts since I was a kid," she explained to the crowd. "My father is an MMA instructor." This revelation sent another wave of excitement through the gathered students. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her calm confidence, her precise movements, her complete lack of fear when facing down opponents much larger than herself. "Are you going to teach Madison's crew a lesson if they try anything else?" someone called out. Sienna shook her head. "I don't want to fight anyone. I just want to be left alone to get my education, but I also won't tolerate being anyone's victim." As the excitement gradually died down and students returned to their normal lunch routines, Sienna found herself sitting alone at her table again. But this time, the solitude felt different. Instead of the isolation of being excluded, it felt like the peace of being respected. Her soda-sticky hair was starting to dry in uncomfortable clumps, and her clothes still smelled like Coca-Cola. But she felt better than she had since arriving at Westfield High. For the first time in weeks, she could eat her lunch without looking over her shoulder, without wondering when the next humiliation would come, without feeling like prey in a hostile environment. Dad always said that bullies only understand one language, she thought, taking a bite of her sandwich. I just wish I could have made my point without having to hurt anyone. But even as she had that thought, she couldn't bring herself to regret what had happened. Madison and her friends had pushed and pushed until they forced a confrontation, and now they were dealing with the consequences of their actions. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of stares, whispers, and congratulations. Word of the cafeteria confrontation had spread through the building with the speed that only high school gossip could achieve. Teachers who had previously ignored Sienna's existence suddenly knew her name. Students who had never acknowledged her before were stopping her in the hallways to offer their support. Most importantly, Madison and her crew were nowhere to be seen. Whether they'd left school early or were simply avoiding the public areas where they might encounter their former victim, Sienna didn't know and didn't care. For the first time in weeks, she could walk through the halls without constantly watching for potential threats. When the final bell rang, Sienna gathered her books and headed for the exit, looking forward to going home and washing the sticky residue from her hair. As she walked through the front doors of Westfield High, she was approached by Tyler Brennan. The basketball player looked nervous and embarrassed, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd come to say. "Hey, Sienna, can I talk to you for a minute?" Sienna paused, studying his face for any signs of aggression or deception, but Tyler just looked like a teenage boy who'd made a mistake and was trying to figure out how to fix it. "What do you want, Tyler?" "I wanted to apologize," he said, looking down at his feet. "For everything. The stuff with Madison, the way we treated you. It wasn't right." Sienna waited for him to continue. "I know this probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but I never wanted to hurt anybody. Madison and those girls, they have a lot of influence around here. I thought if I went along with them, it would be easier than becoming their next target." "So you decided to make me the target instead," Sienna observed. Tyler winced. "Yeah, and that was wrong, really wrong. I'm sorry." Sienna studied him for a long moment, trying to decide if his apology was genuine or just an attempt to avoid further confrontation. But something in his expression suggested real remorse. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "But Tyler, if you ever participate in bullying someone again, anyone, we're going to have problems. Understood?" He nodded quickly. "Understood. And for what it's worth, I think what you did today was pretty brave. Madison needed to be knocked down a few pegs." As Tyler walked away toward the student parking lot, Sienna reflected on the day's events. She hadn't wanted to fight anyone. She genuinely tried to handle the situation peacefully for as long as possible. But sometimes, peaceful solutions weren't enough. Sometimes you had to be willing to stand up for yourself, even if it meant using the skills you'd hoped never to need outside of a controlled environment. "The meek might inherit the earth," she thought, adjusting her backpack straps. but they probably get their lunch money stolen first. 2 weeks later, Sienna's life at Westfield High had transformed completely. The girl who had once eaten lunch alone now found herself surrounded by friends, not fair-weather admirers seeking reflected glory, but genuine friendships with kids who appreciated her willingness to stand up against injustice. Madison and her crew still attended school, but their reign of terror had effectively ended. Word of Madison's humiliating defeat had spread throughout the building, and their former victims were no longer afraid to speak up when the group tried to resume their old patterns of behavior. More importantly, other students had been inspired by Sienna's example and were more willing to intervene when they witnessed bullying. The administration, belatedly aware of the systematic harassment that had been occurring under their noses, had implemented new anti-bullying policies and increased supervision in common areas. Madison herself had been called into the principal's office multiple times as previous victims came forward with their own stories of harassment. As for Sienna, she had found her place in the complex social ecosystem of high school life. She wasn't popular in the traditional sense. She wasn't a cheerleader or student government president or member of any particularly prestigious cliques, but she was respected, and that respect had created a space where she could finally focus on her education instead of merely surviving each day. She still trained every evening in the apartment complex's fitness center, still carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to handle physical confrontation. But she also joined the school's debate team, started tutoring struggling students in chemistry, and even convinced the administration to let her start a self-defense club for students who wanted to learn basic protection techniques. Strength isn't just about being able to fight. She reflected one afternoon while helping a freshman learn how to break free from a wrist grab. It's about being willing to use whatever abilities you have to protect yourself and others. Madison Crawford learned this lesson the hard way, but sometimes hard lessons are the ones that stick the longest, and sometimes the quiet kid in the corner is exactly the wrong person to pick on. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Westfield High became a place where bullying was no longer tolerated, where victims had hope of real support, and where the social hierarchy was based more on character than on popularity or fear. And it all started with one girl who decided she was done being anyone's victim. One girl who proved that sometimes the most powerful response to violence isn't turning the other cheek, it's showing bullies exactly what happens when they pick on the wrong person. Sienna Reeves had found her voice, her strength, and her place in the world, and nobody would ever mistake her for an easy target again.